Okay, so this is all about how to mix a live music session. I guess to start it off with, we're going to have to go to the past. I set up 20 inputs for this particular session. Don't know how well it's going to come across the microphone, but here's what it sounds like right now. Always saving for the touch. Everything in orange is something that can be ran live, so those obviously would have to be done post. But everything in blue you could actually run with a live session. If you'll notice, these ones on the top, mono in 1, 2, 3, those are actually all the inputs I had. I used 20 inputs, well 19 inputs. If you take away my talkback microphone I didn't use. You can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 is somewhere around 9. That was my snare trigger, yeah. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. 20. Oh, wait, I did use 20.
Let's do it, baby. Oh, that's right. Get down tonight. Oh, baby. Get down tonight. Yeah, baby. Get down tonight. Hey, I wanna sing it. Oh, baby. Exception to the rule. Exception to the rule.
Anything that doesn't have an input routing is probably a group track. These are kick bus, overhead bus, tom bus, snare bus. So those are where I take multiple microphones, put them into one, so I can put effects on them all at once. Alright, so let's get down to it. First of all, you need to have 20 microphones set up, or 20 inputs set up properly. I use an HDSP 9652 card and a PC with 3 rack mounts. Each of those rack mounts has 8 inputs, and they all come out with digital out, like optical, that come out from them into my sound card. My sound card can accept 3 optical inputs. Each optical input can carry 8 microphone inputs at the same time. 0 latency over the speed of light. Obviously that's a good thing when you're recording or mixing live. You got to have the speed of light on your side. I don't know if I would ever trust a USB interface to mix anything live because of the packet. It has to send packets and unload packets, and although computers are fast, that takes milliseconds, and you don't got milliseconds. You gotta get everything done instantly if you're mixing this live. So everything in blue can be done live. Everything that's in orange, I don't think it's yeah, orange, can't be done live. Let's go over the tracks. The first thing you're gonna do is you're gonna clean up your tracks when you take them home, assuming that you've mic'd everything up the way you want. My process for the drums was I had two overheads that were in an XLR microphone clip, that XY pattern microphone clip, I should say, that held them in perfect phase, which really helped out. Although I still had to go in here and I had to move things ever so slightly to make sure they're in phase. When you hear the word in phase, what in phase really means, if you zoom way in, you'll see these. That up and that down is actually information telling the speaker to push out and push in. If you are telling a signal, if the signal is telling a speaker to push out, while another speaker is telling, or another signal is telling a speaker to push in, you're going to cancel each other out. You're going to lose some signal, usually the bass, which is why when things are slightly off in recording, they're considered out of phase. It kind of sounds like a whooshing sound, like you're brushing your teeth a little bit. That is out of phase in action. It's also known as like kind of comb filtering and stuff. If you move around the crowd, you'll notice the same thing, because in nature there aren't two speakers that are putting a sound out to you. In nature there's a whole bunch of different localized sounds, so everybody has their own speaker. Everything is its own speaker in nature. In nature, like a broken plate, that plate emanated the sound. So when you have two speakers, that's a completely unnatural situation. That's 100% unnatural. So what happens is two speakers playing the same sound at the same time may end up canceling each other's sound out, because one might play outward while the other one's pushing inward with their magnets, and that will cause phase cancellation, which is why you will, and that causes phase cancellation in different areas of the crowd, because the waves are like water. Think of them as like giant gushing water hoses spraying out, and they will hit each other, and which is why you can walk around in a venue and you can hear, wow, there's way more bass over here, or there's no bass over here, or a lot of cymbal wash over here, and all that stuff. That's just the speaker issue. And then there's the microphone issue, which a microphone is just a speaker in reverse polarity. Just remember that all speakers are microphones. All microphones are speakers. They're just reverse in polarity. One's sending out a signal, one's receiving a signal. You could literally wire a mic in reverse and put it to your ear, and you'd hear music coming out of it if you sent some signal through it. So you want to hold them in a very specific pattern at exactly 45 degrees. You won't have as much phase cancellation. These were held at 45 degrees with a clip. These are my overhead mics, but they still had a little phase cancellation, so I had to manually move them. You notice that all these are moved to be in line with the snare. Even the snare mics, which were held perfectly in phase with a special clip, had to be moved by 0.001 seconds to put them into phase. The main thing you want is your overheads to be in phase with your snare, because you're going to cut out the low end. And if you're not producing low end, you can't phase cancel low end, so you don't have to worry about your kick as much. If you're doing two kick mics, you really, really want to have your two kick mics to be in phase, which I did have to address here. I have a kick and a sub kick. I had a Beta 52 for my kick mic, and my sub kick was a K2 microphone, which is a Rode. And even right here, you can kind of see it's in phase, but it's not in phase. These are my kick and my sub kick microphones. You just gotta, it's an imperfect environment. In a perfect world, I mean, it was on grass, first of all. They were on grass with tarps down and carpeting on top of the tarps. And the drum set was on that. Every little movement moves the microphone by like 0.2 degrees, 0.5 degrees. All that stuff is not a studio environment. So you're just going to have to deal with issues. There's a phase cancellation on the second reflection, or the second wave right here. But the first wave isn't. So I needed it to hit hard. And then eventually it kind of cancels each other's out a little bit. You just got to play with it. If you play with it 1 millisecond at a time by moving it and just listen with your ears, you're going to hear like, oh, that sounds better, that sounds worse, vice versa. I did the same thing, and I decided that this first reflection being in phase is the most important. The first wave being in phase was the most important thing. The overheads obviously are not in phase with the kick, but that doesn't matter because the overheads are going to an overheads bus. Let's bring up the mixing line. The overheads are going to an overhead bus, which is over here. And in the overheads bus, I'm using an equalizer, which if we pull it up, you'll notice I'm just taking out everything at 125 hertz. The kick gets to own that frequency. Nothing's going to mess with it. I've cut out 125 hertz from almost everything except for the bass guitar. We cut it at about 90 hertz or so they can interact a little bit. But the kick still owns all those sub-frequencies. There is nothing else that touches the sub-frequencies, and that's how you get separation. That's how you get a clarity in a boom in your kick without anything else interrupting it, because it's kind of what you don't have that's more important than what you do have when you're mixing things together. So the kick has its own space because I've given it its own space. If you look over here at the snare, the snares are going out to a snare bus. This up here, this is routing. This tells you where it's going, the signal from this track. These tracks are related. They're exactly the same as these tracks, but they're in a format that's more friendly to see them all at the same time. So those are some things you start off with, but really the first thing you're going to do is a lot of work with editing out things you don't need from sources, because there's bleed. There's something called microphone bleed. A microphone's like a human ear. You can put your ear up to a drum, but you're still going to hear the rest of the room. And that's something that we deal with in recording all the time, is microphone bleed. It's a really big issue with hi-hats and snare microphones, especially because they're right next to each other. And you want to manipulate your snare sound without manipulating your hi-hat sound and vice versa, but it's kind of impossible. So we use things called gates, which allow sound to come through, or hi lovers and drifters, Whitney. You allow sound to come through, and then you tell it not to come through if there's no signal. But gates are completely imperfect because there's so much noise happening that the gate might open up when the guy hits the tom that's next to it. So you can't rely on gates. So you're going to have to manually go through. And here I manually went through and I listened to the floor tom. I'm soloing it so you can see there's no noise happening, because I don't want that microphone to make any noise when it's not being hit, when its source isn't being hit, which is the floor tom. So a big part of what makes a good mix is taking away things you don't need, and until you need them. The kick and the sub kick are actually gated because the kick is a loud enough source and far enough away from everything that it doesn't matter. Now, one of the things I use that really helps me out with gating for the snare, because I consider the snare and the kick are the most important parts in my opinion. You want them to sound amazing. So to help me out with the snare, I use the snare trigger, which if you look here, there's no bleed. Look at that. There's no bleed. That's because a trigger is basically a microphone diaphragm with a foam pad on it that you put literally touching the drum head. So you can turn it way down and it makes a huge bump in signal. So it's almost no bleed at all. It sounds like trash. Do not use it for your source of audio, but you use it as a gating trigger. So I have this snare trigger actually going out to 2 gates, the sending out to gates. And if we look at the gates, you'll see the gate, this orange is like how much is turning down the source. There's nothing happening. We play some audio. See? That's it opening up. The trigger is sending a signal out. You're not hearing the trigger, but it's sending a signal out to those microphones saying, you can make a noise now, and then turns it right down. I don't need all that other stuff. Those microphones are cranked. And if the snare mics were just to play the whole time, it would just sound terrible because they're out of phase with everything. They're a slightly different angle and everything. But they sound amazing with each other, playing at once, and then they just go away. Which is, like I said, what's important in mixing is what you take away, not what you add necessarily. So these look like I didn't do any editing to them, but they're very heavily gated perfectly. And the kick's the same way. If you open up the kick, there is a gate on the sub kick. I did not gate the kick, the Beta 52, because Beta 52s, they're pretty good at rejecting other noises. You don't really need to have a gate on them as much as some other microphones. I don't like the sound of a Beta 52. I'm over it. It's old. It's like 80s. But what was that? There's a little bit of noise in there, huh? But I use it because it's so good at just listening to the kick drum. It sends out to a gate. So that sound that you're hearing right now is controlling this gate on the sub kick, which I had a second microphone. I had a really nice microphone. It's a tube microphone. It's like $600. It's called a K2 by Rode. It can be any pattern I want. I had it set to a cardioid pattern. And I had it sitting right next to it. And what that does is it allows me to get a little bit of a real, that nice little clicky attack right there, and more of the low frequencies. As if you just look at the waveforms here, you'll see this kind of peaks out at 50, and this is post EQ, and this peaks out more at like 44, a little lower, a little more sub, and that's after cutting out everything, because I don't need all that low end. 20 hertz is like, it's a low end that you're not going to hear unless you have like a 20-inch subwoofer. But in the digital world, 0 is the loudest. So if you're adding sound you can't hear, you're adding to the sum of 0, and you're turning everything else down. So you want to get rid of things you can't hear, because that just turns everything else down in the digital world. You notice everything's a negative number. This is negative 9.8 right here. That's how loud it is. 0 is max in the digital world. So let's see, I don't have the R bass on there because I just decided I didn't like it. But on this, these are processing, these little blue things, these are plugins. We can open them all up. This is a harmonic bass enhancer, and it goes from top to bottom. So it goes through the EQ to the CLA 76, which is a really nice compressor. Let me turn these all off. This is what it sounds like with them all off. That's what most people would mix in a live concert, because most people don't do processing. I do processing. It adds a lot more low-end punch and guttiness to it. And then you combine it with a sub-kick, you get a little reality added in there, because that microphone's picking up, that's a condenser microphone picking up everything. In a live situation, this still works. Normally condensers are not what you want to use live, but if you can gate your condenser, you can use it live, because condensers pick up really far away sounds, and you don't want far away sounds picked up. But this is so close proximity to my kick drum that it's I literally think of it, even if the closer you are to a signal source, the more you can turn it down and still get a nice big bump. So I'm basically turning down the rest of the environment because it's like 1 inch away from the kick drum, which allows me to get less bleed, yes, but let's turn off the gate. You're still hearing, listen to that. Cymbals, snare, vocal. You're hearing a vocal. That's the kick drum mic. Listening to a vocal. You don't want to be messing with that vocal. You don't want to be adding a bunch of low into your vocal or have it come through. It's tainting your vocal. So you're messing with your vocal. You're like, oh, my vocal sounds great. Yeah, this end, it's not going to sound great. You gate it. A lot less. Even that Beta 52 by itself picks up a little bit of vocal and everything. But that's live. That's why recording in a studio is so much better than live sound. Because in a studio I can just have that drummer go through and play the drums all by himself with the headphones on, listening to the rest of the performance through headphones. No bleed issues, and I can just crank effects on things. I can crank up volumes and not have any other sounds mess with my other sounds. So we just kind of got to do a lot of halfway measures of the live mix. It's probably my favorite part of the performance right here. This tom right here sounds gorgeous. Look at that snare trigger. Those are side stick hits. Side stick hits. It's picking it up perfectly. Shout out to Roland. They make great triggers. And it fits on any drum too. There's these things called Red Hots. They don't fit on any drum. Don't buy them. Now we got the rack tom coming in. See, I didn't need the rack tom until then. It was just a bunch of noise I didn't need. Now it's in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 mics on that drum kit, which only had 2 toms. 2 snare mics with a trigger, 2 overheads, sub kick, Beta 52 kick, tom mic, floor tom mic. Those are TSM411s by CAD. And there was a Timbale, which I don't need most of the time. And listen to that trigger doing a great job with the snare. Look at it. Let's see what the signal looks like. See, look at that. It's letting all those ghost notes in. Yes. Love you, Roland. Look at those signals. Oh my god. No bleed. Overhead, tons of bleed. The keyboard is glorious, obviously, because I can... That's a direct in, that's a digital keyboard. And Juicy is freaking amazing. Listen to this. Listen to this. And the bass is a direct in as well. A little bit of slap bass. It's probably the coolest part of the bass. Let's listen to the bass player. It's gonna start slapping pretty soon. In fact, the coolest part of the performance is when he's like doing this like crazy 30-second notes. Perfectly in line with this snare. Which let's listen to that snare with it. And the kicks with that. Just the snare and the kicks. With the bass. Once again, we don't need all this tom noise, we just don't need it. Just get rid of it. The toms I have cranked, they each have compression going on, 2 stages of it, 2 EQs, getting rid of some of the low frequencies I didn't need, because like I said, we want to let that kick drum exist where that kick drum goes. Even the floor tom. Even the floor tom. Let's unmute these, it's so low. So you're going to hear these toms come in all by themselves, right here. You can hear how much noise they add, but because I'm getting rid of the information. There you go. Probably the nicest example of that would be like right around here. Done. I let it ring out a little bit because we're already controlling a lot of the bleed through equalization. Probably one of the coolest parts of the kick drum or the bass, not the bass. The floor tom is right here. Listen to those overheads. So just the bass guitar and the drum mics together. No vocal mics. The vocal mics are letting a lot of things through, so this will be a little more. I was saying get a little bit louder. That drummer has such good dynamic control. Look at that. Most drummers do not, first of all, they don't even accurately hit that well. But most drummers do not have that amount of articulation with their foot where they can like control their volume of these double hits. Now he's getting a little bit louder. So good. right about when he starts to get crazy with the snare. Doing a long snare roll. Well, the bass guitar is just going insane. He's using probably all 4 fingers. It's a technique you have to learn hundreds and hundreds of hours. You hear a little bit of the keyboard because that's the overhead's picking it up. Add the keys in. Now let's do the whole mix. Hear all that? All those high frequencies are from their vocal mics. What I didn't go through and edit down their vocal mics because when you mix your vocal as loud as it needs to be and you gate it or even edit it, it's so apparent that it comes and goes. You just want to work with your vocal mics and make them sound right. I went through and I actually made one of the vocal mics in phase with the snare because it was having a bit of an issue. And a big problem with vocal mics is cymbal bleed. So what we do for cymbal bleed, first of all, this is Juicy's vocal, number 3. First thing we're doing is we're running a de-esser on these high frequencies, on a multi-band de-esser. See, it's getting rid of some of the wash that you're going to get from the cymbals. But then we also go into the entire vocal bus, which is all the vocals put together. They go to the vocal bus, and I admit I'm putting a lot of processing on them because I want them to sound great. And then here we have a de-esser at the end of the chain, kind of picking up 3,300 hertz because that's where your cymbal wash is, 3.3K. And this right here is the amount it's being reduced. It's reduced that hit by 1 dB. That's the maximum it's gonna reduce. Let's see. And when the hi-hat, he's kind of delicate with the hi-hats, so there's not much needed. It did a 3.3 reduction right there. Yeah, there's another that took that cymbal down by 3.3. Let's refresh it. 0.2, 0.3. Up, that cymbal hit, those cymbal hits, 4.2 dB reduction. 5.6. Without this, that would have just shown right through the vocal mic and it would have just poked right out. You just hear way too much cymbal. So you just work with the vocal mics because I want them to be loud enough to be present in the mix. And when you get that loud, like I said, if you gate them or you edit out the stuff you don't need, it's going to be like, where'd all this high end come from and why did it go away? They just want it to just be as good consistent as possible, except for the drummer. The drummer, his mic's too close to the drums. I had to edit out, which means I did a lot of processing to the drummer. I did a lot of filtering. Filter out a lot of highs. Without that, listen to that. So much cymbal. So I filter that out. And he sounds like he's on like a vintage microphone or something, which is kind of cool. And it mixes together with the other vocals and adds a little dynamic. Like, just listen to the vocals. We're just listening to the vocal mics.
Yes, please. We wanna always be loving. We can never seem to get the good stuff. Not kissing and hugging even when things are tough. And down when things are down, we're up.
This is one of the best performances from Juicy right here. Right here, this is sexy.
Even when things are
Look at that. Oh, 3-part. It's like NSYNC, but way better.
Love is all there is.
Let's listen to that part right there again with all the instruments. Yeah. Exactly. So you got rid of all your stuff that you don't need. Now we're on to the mixing part. Levels are huge. That's just something you learn over time. You don't have to worry about levels with this stuff like this. The DI bass is very important to me, because bass is very important to me. I started on the bass when I started learning music. Besides piano, I actually played piano for 10 years before that, but that was just kind of dinking around every day. So what I do with the bass DI, this is just directly off the amp, no mic. Let's get rid of all these. So this is what it sounds like normally. Volume is a big part. Obviously, it's a lot lower volume with all these effects on it. But also, it's anemic. There is no low end really. So first thing I do is I put it through a Sans amp or an amp emulator. This is really good at emulating a cabinet and emulating an amp. So I'm running through a bass amp and a bass cabinet, a Hanger 18 clone. And I can't remember what that's a clone of, but it's a clone of some world famous amp. I have some settings set. I got a lot of mid-range in it because I lost my I mic'd the bass cabinet, but it fell over at this point. So I'm just trying to recover those frequencies. The microphone's really good at picking up the mid-range. It lets it come through small, tiny speakers, so your bass is really pairing small, tiny speakers. You just have to work with it. I have it emulating a U87 in Omni, which is a it's one of the most expensive microphones in the world. It's like $5,000. But it's just an emulation, so it's not going to be completely true to it. Neumann, it's a Neumann U87. And from there, the signal goes down. I'm start activating some more plugins to go back to where we were. Let's go back here. From there, I go and I get rid of frequencies I don't need, because once again, it's about what you don't need. I don't need this high end, I don't need this low end, so much more focused. I don't need that sub low. The hic exists there. We got a lot of low end. You know, we still got it, even though I cut it. Look at that. We got lots of low end. The next thing I do is, in order to make it stand out in the mix always, you gotta get just the right amount of compression and just the right amount of attack on that compression. Compression is a piece of equipment that when it receives volume, turns down the volume when it reaches a threshold. So you give it a threshold, say I want it to be this loud, and when it gets beyond that loud, it starts to say you're not allowed to get that loud. But it doesn't cut it all out, because that would be completely unnatural. So this is what all these settings are for. This is how quickly it gets in action. 0.3 milliseconds. That's fast. You can get faster. 0.3 milliseconds makes a big difference than, I should say 3 milliseconds, sorry. 3 milliseconds versus 0.3. 3 milliseconds is enough for a little noise to come through, and it makes your brain go, oh, there's a sound there, because we hear with our brains, not with our ears. So I have it to 3 milliseconds. You can turn up to 30, be a lot more boomy. But 3.3 is it's a good amount of control. Let's turn this on. You don't hear that much of a difference. It's very, very, very subtle. Your release is how quickly it's lets go once the volume goes back down below that threshold. Like, okay, you can turn back up again. And then the ratio is how much it kicks in, because the compressor doesn't get rid of all the volume past a certain point. It gets rid of a ratio of volume. This is a 6:1. That's pretty heavy. So for every 6 dBs above the threshold that volume gets, it will turn it down. It will allow 1. It will allow 1. So for every 6, it allows 1. 12 dBs above it, allow 2 more above the threshold. So you're saying you can be above the threshold, but in only a 6:1 ratio. Because I like to ratio down my bass as much as I can. I gotta squash it to make it fit in the mix, because everything has to be of equal volume. If you do too much, you get rid of all the life. Yeah, it's all the same volume. I could turn that up at 2 and make it fit, but it's just, you want some dynamic. So I want my VU meters to be moving just a little bit. So it's just moving a little bit. There's also a bass bus that has another compressor on it. It's doing a little bit of work. It's called feathering your compression. So I have 2 compressors working together. This compressor is not identical, because this compressor has a really, really steep thrust detector. So that's like another form of the attack. It changes the attack, makes it sound like it's pushing the speaker too hard. then that's why I like to put these two together. It's kind of like wet on wet painting. So the next thing down that bass is a R bass. Ooh, that adds harmonic frequencies. This is kind of magic. You tell it what frequency you want to enhance, and it will. And a harmonic is like every double that frequency, upwards and downwards, those are called harmonics. So this is enhancing 80 hertz. It's probably bumping 160, but also like it's got a whole bunch of magic going on under the hood. It's hard to explain because it does it in a very, very specific way that enhances the bass only. All that together, now probably I bumped the volume up enough for this compressor to start kicking in more. Yeah, see, it's doing like 2, 3 dB compression. And now we're down to the bass bus. The bass bus also has a compressor on it. Now this is interesting. This is a cool trick that I learned. You send your kick mics to a compressor on the bass guitar, and then your kick can shine through a high level bass guitar because it's turning down the bass for a very, very short amount of time. See if I can find a spot where he's actually using it. Stupid spot to be. Right here. So right there, you can see it. So it's just instantly turning down that bass guitar by about 6 dBs just for when the kick hits, and it adds this pump thing. So it's just down, up, down, up, down. Every time it hits, it just turns down the volume of the bass guitar and then comes right back up within like a snap of a finger. But it really lets the kick shine through. Otherwise, I'd have to like lower both of their volumes a ton, and we just not have as much bass. That's why modern music sounds amazing. It's because we figured out these techniques where we can have a lot of bass by manipulating, taking turns with the bass. So these are taking turns consuming the bass frequencies now because I've given it a sidechain compression. I'm telling those kicks to send a signal to this compressor, and that compressor is compressing the bass guitar when the kick hits. Otherwise, I could get the kick and the bass to work together, but their volumes would be so compromised, it would sound like the 70s. That's the big difference. We want them all to be big. Yeah, get them all to be big, you gotta take turns being big. And you take turns in a super methodical way with compression. Sidechain compression. Sidechain means I'm receiving a signal from another thing, but I'm applying compression from that signal from another thing. And the other thing is the kick bus sending to the sidechain compressor on the bass guitar. Huge deal, in my opinion. Let's everything be loud. Now those overhead mics, let's go check out those overhead mics. Turn off all the effects on them. So this is what the overhead mics are sounding like with nothing. Lots of snare, lots of kick, because those are the loudest pieces of the drum set. So how we raise the volume of the cymbals is algebraic. We reduce the volume of the kick and the snare. How we do that? Really, really fast compression. Like really fast. And a lot of it. So this is set to like 0.3 milliseconds. Without it. With it. Without it. With it. Next thing we do is, we got frequencies we don't need. We just don't need them. We don't want that kick to come through, because once again, now we're going to deal with those phase issues. Those microphones are a different distance. Sound takes time to travel. So the time it takes to get to those overheads, that wave is going to be a different timing, which means that it's going to tell that speaker a different timing to push out, and maybe when the kick is telling it to push in. So we're just going to eliminate that problem in the equation and get rid of those low frequencies. Here we go, just did it. Let's listen to this again. Way less to deal with there. I also didn't really need all that really, really bright high end. It's just a little too much going on. So I got off the super high. This is like 14 kilohertz, and I'm letting some of it exist beyond that. But you just, when you're doing live, I want the shine in the vocal, so I'm letting the vocal have a tiny bit more shine by taking away some of the shine from the overheads. I need my cymbals to come through. Now, I also want that to add some space and dimension. I want the cymbals to, adding reverb, kind of like, it's also like a wet on wet effect, like from Bob Ross. You now all of a sudden it kind of just fades into the mix more, and we're gonna turn that on right now. There we go. So those are my overheads. Full mix. It's kind of beautiful too, if you do it right. You don't want to overdo it. I have the overhead, damn it, set to like 10%, so 10% reverb going through. Let's see what it sounds like cranked. You don't want to do that. Noobs do that. You want to do just 10%, just 10%, just a little bit.
Naughty, aren't you? Yeah.
The last part of this equation is I have crowd microphones, and obviously I don't need those crowd microphones. But there's this cool spot right here where they kind of fade out.
It's about that beer. So much beer.
And I add in the crowd just to add a little activity, because that's literally what was happening. They were playing in front of a crowd. So let's solo those mics. There's tons and tons of phase issues here because they're facing the other direction. Now listen to that, they're having fun. It just adds a little liveliness to the whole thing. And then at the very end, obviously I bring the crowd in again, because they're clapping. You want to hear the clapping, don't you? Let's solo those again. And this is the very end, and they're kind of like fading out.
The most delicate way to look at. Thank you guys. Thank you.
Yeah.
Are we drinking? We're drinking, right? It's Beer Fest. We definitely drink. I hope we're drinking. We are sweet and juicy.
I have a stereo pair because you need to use your soundscape. You want everything to exist in different areas so they all have their own room. You wouldn't ever want to sit in the passenger seat at the same time. You got the rear seats, you got the driver's seat, you got the way rear seats. And that's kind of like the stereo field. I don't need everything to be in the middle. I don't want something like those claps and stuff. Those people, they can be on way out in the sides. I got them panned 100% with an ORTF pattern clip. And the ORTF holds them a little further apart than an XY pattern. So they're like at 45 degrees away from each other, but they're also like wide. And it just really helps me get them out of the middle. And that allows for the clarity of the vocal down the middle. So when they're bantering, you can hear them banter way better.
Delicate way to look at. Thank you guys. Thank you. Are we drinking? We're drinking, right? It's Beer Fest. We're definitely drinking. God, I hope we're drinking. We are sweet and juicy. I'm sweet. That's juicy. That's N. Sweet and juicy. There you go. There it is. We are, of course, we would expect fruits to be from Portland, Oregon.
This little blue line, that's the end of the song.
Right down the road. That's where we're from. There's a knee slapper. Hey.
What have we not talked about? Well, the crowd, there's nothing going on with these, no processing, it's all natural. We talked about the bass, we talked about the snare trigger, we talked about the toms, we talked about the kicks. The snares, well, the snares are pretty neat because there's two of them, right? And like I said, I did have to move one by like 1/2 of a millisecond. But let's listen to those. Nothing. Why? Because I'm not listening to the trigger. We need to listen to the trigger or we don't hear the... I just love that so much. The ghost notes come through and everything. So I moved this trigger, I moved it ahead. I moved it out of phase completely because I don't care about phase. We're not listening to the signal. If I did move it ahead so that it would hit the gate before the hit, so that the hit would come through nicely. So that's a trick too. And later on, I can do that. I can't do that live, obviously, but later I can do that. Now, there's a Sm57. Let's just listen to that. It always has good mid-range, but no high-end, no low-end. It's just a mid-range beast. So that gate's hitting. Then I have it EQing. I'm notching out a lower frequency I thought was just really annoying. Let's see what it sounds like without this. It just loses a little bit of focus with it. I just don't need all that high end. I'm getting the high end from the M5. Then it goes through a lot of compression, which I can only do because I'm using a trigger. If I didn't have a trigger, I would just have to have no compression and have the snare sound anemic and small. But because I'm able to really heavily compress it, because it gated, I can heavily compress it. What that does is it lets the ghost notes be almost as loud as the hits, and you can hear those hits. So now your ghost notes, the little trills where you just put your stick down and go, that actually comes through, which is pretty neat. See, it's kind of a big hit there. Yep, see, so it turns that down, therefore the softer hits sound louder because the louder hits sound quieter. It's all algebra. Very, very basic algebra. I'm using an R bass on here too because I like a certain amount of low end. See, it sounds like, once again, it doesn't have any oomph with it. And I'm enhancing a really high really high bass frequency. 162 hertz is like, your phone can put out 162 hertz. So now your phone actually can put out that snare and make it sound full. I just want a little fullness from it. And let's switch over to the M5. This is a Rode condenser microphone. A lot of high end in a condenser microphone. Let's listen to it without any of these. No gate, no nothing. Yeah, I'm hearing everything, right? Needs a gate. Needs a gate. So just the gate by itself helps. I also don't need those really, really high shimmery highs. That's going to just step on the vocal shimmer. Let's get rid of that. I just want like the mid highs. I don't even want this annoying like right here. We can turn that off. It makes it sound thin because it's too much of this mid-high. And I also notched out 200 hertz because it kind of steps on the bass guitar. I don't want to step on the bass guitar. Now we can compress the snot out of it again. This is a super, super fast release with a very, very slow attack. Which means that it takes a while for it to actually initiate. And that's because I just wanted to turn down like other things when it opens. You can see it's working. Working just a little bit. And I have it like a super high ratio, like 30-to-1 ratio. Like it's massively high. You just learn to do these different things to the different pieces of the drum set to make them sound like they're supposed to. Or at least make them sound like how we like them to sound in a record. It's not like how they're supposed to because it's completely unnatural. But we're used to a completely unnatural sound. We don't like natural sounds. We like emphasized sounds. So all together, all the effects on it sounds like this. And you want them to be in phase with each other because if they're out of phase with each other, it just sounds like a joke. So they are in phase with each other. That's a huge deal. We can turn them out of phase with each other. Let's listen to that. In phase. Out of phase. Sounds like a side stick because there's no bass. See, that's me telling the speaker to go out while the other one's telling the speaker to go in because I'm reversing their phase. They're perfectly in phase, so when I tell them to reverse polarity, it's actually perfectly out of phase. Which is also another pretty big deal. So we talk about the snares, we talk about the overheads. That's a huge part. The keys, yes, the keys. I did a lot. I did some set, see, without anything. Sounds good-ish. The other thing is, I took these, this is a stereo pair, a left and a right, because it's a Nord keyboard. It was a nice keyboard. And I have them fine-tuned to be slightly slightly off, out of tune with each other, the left and the right, by like, not even, like 3 semitones. Super, super slight. And then I panned them hard left and hard right. And then I delayed one by 2 milliseconds, and I pushed one forward by 2 milliseconds. So they're super wide. The keyboard's like massively wide. And that makes it so that the vocal can come through right in the middle.
Yeah, that's right.
They're on. Vocals in the middle, keys are way off to the left and the right. The other thing I'm doing is, let's go back to the keyboard bus. First of all, we're getting rid of that low end. We don't want it to step on the bass guitar. We don't need this super low. I'm also bumping the signal a little bit because I got rid of it. So you heard a volume increase right there. And then I don't need the shimmery high once again because I want the vocal to exist in the shimmery high. And I increase like the high mids because I want it to kind of poke out. It needs to like do its own thing. So that's its own frequency. 6 kilohertz, 5 kilohertz. That's where the vocal is too, but that's where the keys are. And they're so far left and right. They're so far panned out with and they're slightly out of phase through that, me taking them 2 milliseconds back and forward. And they're slightly out of tune, left and right, that it makes it okay for me to have it kind of loud. Then I'm adding bass frequencies to the upper mid-range. So I gutted the bass frequencies, then I'm adding them back in, but in a different location through this bass harmonic. Then I add some distortion, pleasant distortion, like a tube distortion. So this is, what is this supposed to be? I believe it's like a console saturator, and it's just adding a little bit of like pleasant, like guitar distortion, but like really light, like really light. And it just makes it kind of like sit in the mix better. It adds some texture. It's another Bob Ross, like all of a sudden the whole thing changes and it just kind of sits better. Then, in order to let the vocals come through and make it so that this doesn't like step on the vocals when it's really loud, I added a multiband compressor. So the vocal is right here in the mid. Vocals are like 250 hertz to 4 kilohertz. That's where they really exist, like hardcore. So I'm turning down the piano when it gets loud in that frequency so the vocals can come through just fine. And that's like a little trick too. That can't be done live, but that's a post-production thing. Now we're gonna add a little bit of plate reverb because that's just sexy. Make it sound like we're in a concert. It's very light. Crank it up, sounds like this. It's almost like a tiled bathroom, right? It's a little lively, this. Turn it back down. And that just adds a little dimension, a little space, a little sense of space. We have another EQ on here because I added a bunch of bass in with the R bass. And I'm like, once again, I don't want to accidentally add in too much sub-frequency, so I just want to add in upper mids. So I got rid of those upper mids. And then I really cranked down the highs on the piano because I want those vocals to have shimmer space. So the super ultra highs, which is 6.2 kilohertz and above, with a nice gentle slope, is just being completely eliminated. Just because I want to exist in a certain space, allow everything to exist together, right? Then I'm compressing it again, but not with multiband, with an overall compressor, just to allow me to control the volume and have it when he's playing delicate and sexy to come through, and when he's playing hard to not step on everything. So once it's an algebraic equation, you turn down the crazy loud volumes, then you can turn up the overall, and now it's controlled, but you're not squashing it because you're using a compressor. So I have a 10 millisecond attack. It's really slow, super slow. Ratio is only 4:1. It has a pretty long release. And that the longer your attack and longer release, the more transparent the compressor is, the less it's doing its job, but the more transparent. Like, it's not like you can hear it. Like, I can't be like, oh, I hear a compressor. But I'm hitting it really hard, even though I have it set to long attack and really kind of a low ratio or medium ratio and a long release. Because I do want to make it do its job, but I want it to be transparent at the same time. So you gotta make decisions. In a live environment especially, because it's coming through the vocal mics. You can still kind of hear it in the vocal mics. so I can squash it quite a bit and still retain a lot of dynamic because it's coming through all the damn microphones. Alright, I think we went through everything. I mean, the vocals have their own, I think you might worry a little bit about that. You don't need low end. Lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of compression on the vocals, just like shit tons. Because there's a lead instrument. They need to just always be just right. And so this is a very special compressor, very typical. Well, we're not. Let's listen to him being awesome. Let's listen to the one that's actually singing. Or see. Look at that. Look at that thing working. Look at it. Oh yeah. Keeps it really smooth, really even, just insanely aggressive. Because I've chosen to let everything be transparent, so now I can do this. And both of them have a multiband for de-essing. So the de-ess through multiband, so it's basically two de-essers at once. Both of them are. So this is sweet and that's juicy. And then also I'm compressing out the low end, because I don't want to get rid of the low end, because there's some nice sweet low end in their voice, but I don't need all the low end from the other instruments. So like, it's just kind of like letting some through sometimes, just to like say I exist, and then takes it away. Once again, we hear with our brains instead of our ears. So your brain hears a little bit of the low end for a second and goes, oh, there's low end. And the drummer, like I said, super heavily filtered just because his microphone is so close to the drums. And they all go to a vocal bus. And in that vocal bus, there's another compressor to compress them all together with a little bit of linkage to keep the circle. There's another distortion. This is a tape saturation. There's another bit of equalization to get them a little brighter. And like I said, these are the ranges that the vocals are in. So you need a little more brightness on that. I do add a really slight touch of low end to their voice afterwards. And then I cut it out because I want this area to have frequencies. And then I run a final de-esser for getting rid of the cymbal wash, and that's just at the cymbal wash frequency. So there's a multiband de-esser on their original mics, and then there's a final de-esser on the whole entire thing. Because compression after de-essing gets rid of some of the de-essing. I just wanted one de-esser at the very end. So I'm really actually getting rid of that cymbal wash. And I think that's the majority of this mix. We're done reviewing the mix.